Unveiling Rome's Hidden Cracks, Part 2 of the Empire's Decline. What if I told you that Rome's downfall began not in a single moment, but across centuries? While the empire seemed at its peak, hidden cracks were already forming, slowly leading to its collapse. What went wrong? In this second part of our series on the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, we'll uncover the first warning signs of Rome's decay: corruption, economic struggles, and the beginning of its military decline. Stay with us. You won't believe how early Rome's downfall actually began. The cracks in Rome's foundation, early signs of decline. Rome's golden age was impressive, but no empire lasts forever. The warning signs were there, hidden beneath the grandeur. Let's break down the first signs of Rome's decline. Political corruption and weak leadership. Rome's system of selecting capable rulers started to fail. After the golden age of the 5 good emperors, Rome saw a dangerous shift. Emperors were no longer chosen for their ability, but through bribery, assassinations, and military coups. One of the first signs of decline came with Commodus, 180–192 AD. Unlike his father, Marcus Aurelius, Commodus ruled with excess and cruelty. He even renamed Rome after himself, calling it Colonia Commodiana. Imagine the leader of your country suddenly renaming an entire nation after himself. It was an act of pure egomania. But Commodus was just the beginning. After his assassination, Rome entered the year of the 5 emperors, 193 AD, a chaotic period where multiple rulers fought for control. This marked the beginning of a pattern. Emperors no longer ruled for the people. They ruled for themselves. Economic instability and hyperinflation. With corruption came economic disaster. Rome's currency, once one of the strongest in the world, began to lose value due to overproduction of coins. Emperors, desperate to fund wars and lavish lifestyles, started debasing the denarius, reducing its silver content. This led to hyperinflation. By the 3rd century, a loaf of bread cost 100 times more than it had a century before. Ordinary citizens struggled, and the empire's once thriving middle class began to disappear. At one point, things got so bad that tax collectors stopped accepting money altogether. Instead, they demanded payment in goods like wheat, cattle, or even clothing. Can you imagine paying your taxes with a sack of grain? That was the reality in late Rome. The first signs of military decline. Rome's legions, once the most feared fighting force in the world, started showing weaknesses. Soldiers were no longer fighting for Rome. They were fighting for the highest bidder. By the late 2nd century, Rome had to rely more on mercenaries, foreign troops with little loyalty to the empire. These soldiers often switched sides or revolted when they weren't paid. One shocking example, the Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite bodyguards, started auctioning off the position of emperor to the highest bidder. In 193 AD, they literally sold the Roman Empire to a wealthy senator named Didius Julianus for 25,000 sesterces per guard. This was Rome's government at its most absurd. Power was now something you could buy. The decadence of the Roman elite. While ordinary citizens struggled with economic hardship, Rome's elites indulged in extravagance beyond belief. Banquets featuring flamingo tongues, peacock brains, and roasted dormice were common among the aristocracy. The historian Suetonius described how Emperor Elagabalus, 218–222 AD, bathed in scented oils and decorated his palace with gold dust. He even held a feast where he buried guests in flower petals, literally suffocating them under roses. This growing divide between the wealthy elite and struggling citizens led to unrest. The empire, once united by its vision and discipline, was now tearing itself apart from within. The moral decline of Rome. As political corruption and economic instability increased, Roman society itself began to shift. Where discipline and duty once defined the empire, now excess, selfishness, and complacency took over. One telling sign? The gladiator games became more extreme, evolving from simple combat into gruesome executions and blood spectacles. Criminals were thrown into arenas to be torn apart by wild animals for entertainment, and some emperors even staged naval battles inside the Colosseum, flooding it to recreate ocean warfare. Even Rome's sense of civic duty weakened. Historian Edward Gibbon pointed out that many Romans stopped volunteering for military service, preferring a life of comfort. The empire had grown too reliant on mercenaries and foreign recruits to defend its borders. The cracks in Rome's foundation were now impossible to ignore. Corruption, economic decline, and moral decay had set in. But this was just the beginning. Things were about to get much, much worse. Did you know about the absurd luxuries of Rome's elite? What shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode in this series. The Crisis of the 3rd Century, Rome in Chaos. If you thought Rome's decline was slow, think again. The Crisis of the 3rd Century, 235–284 AD, was one of the most chaotic times in Roman history, nearly destroying the empire entirely. A never-ending civil war. Rome, once a symbol of stability, fell into political anarchy. In just 50 years, Rome had over 26 emperors, most of whom were assassinated or killed in battle. With no stable leadership, Rome was constantly torn apart by civil wars. Imagine this: between 235 and 285 AD, a new emperor would take power, only to be assassinated within months. Some were killed by their own guards, others by rival generals, and some even died from plagues sweeping the empire. It was a period of complete instability. One of the most infamous examples is Emperor Pupienus and Balbinus, who were elected as co-emperors in 238 AD, only to be murdered by their own Praetorian Guard after just 99 days in power. That's how dangerous it was to rule Rome. Foreign invasions begin. While Rome was busy fighting itself, external enemies took advantage. The Goths, Vandals, and Persians launched attacks on multiple fronts. In 260 AD, the Persian king Shapur did the unthinkable. He captured the Roman Emperor Valerian. Instead of ransoming him, Shapur humiliated Rome by using Valerian as his personal human footstool whenever he mounted his horse. Yes, the Emperor of Rome was literally used as a step stool. And it gets worse. After years of captivity, Shapur executed Valerian and had his body stuffed and displayed as a trophy, a shocking symbol of Rome's weakening power. The empire begins to split. As Rome's chaos continued, different parts of the empire broke away. The most famous example was the Gallic Empire, 260–274 AD. where provinces like Gaul, Britain, and Spain simply declared independence from Rome. At the same time, in the east, the Palmyrene Empire formed under Queen Zenobia, taking control of Syria and Egypt. For a time, Rome was no longer one empire. It was three. And for many Romans, it seemed like Rome itself was doomed. The economy collapses. Further, trade routes became unsafe due to constant war, cities declined, and massive taxation crushed citizens. Many people abandoned urban centers, leading to economic stagnation. The Roman economy, already struggling, now faced a complete breakdown. Inflation skyrocketed, and people turned to barter trade because money had lost its value. Farmers, merchants, and even soldiers often preferred payments in food or livestock instead of worthless Roman coins. Things got so bad that Rome's roads and cities started falling into disrepair, as there was no money left for maintenance. The empire, once the master of engineering and infrastructure, was now struggling to keep its own capital intact. The temporary rescue by Aurelian. One emperor, Aurelian, 270–275 AD, managed to stabilize Rome briefly. Known as the restorer of the world, he defeated invading tribes, reconquered breakaway provinces, and introduced currency reforms. One of his most famous acts was building the Aurelian walls around Rome, a massive defensive project recognizing that for the first time, the capital itself was under serious threat. Aurelian was one of the last truly capable emperors of the crisis period. But like many before him, he was assassinated by his own men, and Rome's long-term problems remained unsolved. The rise of Diocletian, a drastic solution. By 284 AD, Rome was still in chaos. That's when Diocletian took power. He realized that one man alone could no longer govern an empire this large and unstable. His solution? Split the empire in two, creating an Eastern and Western Roman Empire, each with its own emperor. This helped manage the crisis, but also sowed the seeds for Rome's eventual collapse. Diocletian also introduced price controls to stop inflation, but this backfired. Merchants refused to sell goods at low fixed prices, leading to food shortages. The Roman economy was now barely surviving. The psychological toll on Rome. The crisis of the 3rd century shattered Rome's confidence. Once a proud and invincible empire, Rome was now a war-torn land filled with instability, inflation, and fear. Ordinary Romans no longer believed their empire was eternal. They saw their emperors killed, their economy crumble, and their cities attacked. Many abandoned their faith in traditional Roman gods, turning instead to mystery religions and Christianity as sources of hope. Did you know about Emperor Valerian's humiliating fate? What do you think was the biggest reason for Rome's decline? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode in this series. The empire splits, the beginning of the end. Diocletian's bold reform. Rome was now a shadow of its former self. But instead of fixing its problems, the empire made a drastic decision. It split in two. Diocletian's reforms and the East-West divide. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian realized that Rome was too big to manage alone. His solution? Split the empire into an Eastern and Western Roman Empire, with two emperors ruling separately. This seemed like a logical step to prevent further chaos, but in reality, It laid the foundation for division and rivalry. The East, with its wealth and strong cities like Constantinople, flourished. Meanwhile, the West, burdened with economic decline and constant invasions, struggled to keep up. What's surprising is that Diocletian didn't just split power. He introduced the Tetrarchy, a system with 4 rulers, 2 senior emperors called Augusti and 2 junior emperors, Caesars. It was an ambitious plan, but it ultimately led to confusion, power struggles, and more civil wars. The beginning of Christian influence. By this time, Christianity was spreading rapidly. After centuries of persecution, a dramatic shift occurred in 313 AD when Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity with the Edict of Milan. But here's something fascinating. Before his famous conversion, Constantine allegedly had a vision of a cross in the sky with the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." Inspired by this, he painted Christian symbols on his soldiers' shields before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and won. Whether this vision truly happened or was a clever political move, it changed history forever. Constantine's embrace of Christianity marked a turning point. While it unified much of the empire religiously, it also shifted power away from Rome's traditional pagan institutions, causing tensions between old and new believers. The power struggle and civil wars continue. Despite Diocletian's reforms, the empire remained unstable. After his retirement, yes, he voluntarily stepped down, something unheard of for a Roman emperor. Rival factions fought for control. Constantine eventually emerged as the sole ruler by 324 AD, reunifying the empire, but at a cost. He moved the capital from Rome to Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople. This was a major shift, signaling that the center of power had officially moved east. Rome can no longer defend itself. By the late 4th century, the Western Roman Empire was struggling to maintain its borders. The Huns, led by the terrifying Attila, launched devastating raids into Roman lands. At the same time, the Visigoths, led by Alaric, marched toward Rome itself. And here's where things get unbelievable. The Romans actually tried to pay off the Visigoths to keep them from attacking. In 408 AD, they gave them a staggering 5,000 pounds of gold, 30,000 pounds of silver, silk, and spices just to leave. But it didn't work. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. Rome was sacked for the first time in 800 years. The decline of the Roman army. Another shocking issue. Rome no longer had enough real Romans in its military. By the 5th century, most of Rome's legions were composed of Germanic mercenaries, many of whom had divided loyalties. One example, the Roman general Stilicho, himself of Vandal descent, was one of the last great commanders of Rome. But suspicion against him led to his execution in 408 AD, leaving the empire defenseless against invasion. Rome's enemies were now inside its own ranks, fighting not for the empire, but for whoever paid them more. This lack of loyalty was devastating. Rome's final collapse begins. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire was barely holding on. One of the last emperors, Romulus Augustulus, was nothing more than a puppet ruler. In 476 AD, he was deposed by the Germanic warlord Odoacer, marking the official fall of the Western Roman Empire. But here's the twist. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, survived for another 1,000 years. While Rome fell in the west, Constantinople became the new heart of what was left of Roman civilization. The psychological impact of Rome's fall. Imagine being a Roman citizen in the 5th century, watching the once great empire crumble. For centuries, Rome had been the eternal city, the unshakable center of the world. But now, foreign invaders ruled its streets, its government was gone, and its people had lost faith in their leaders. The Dark Ages were about to begin, and for many, it felt like the world itself was ending. The collapse of Rome sent shockwaves through history, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Rome's fall didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, painful process that took centuries. But by the 5th century, the empire was running out of time. Could anything have saved it, or was its fall inevitable? Did you know about the ransom Rome paid to the Visigoths? What do you think was the final nail in the coffin for the Western Roman Empire? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode in this series. Next episode, the final fall of the Western Roman Empire.